What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I am unveiling my personal deck list for Black Knight. It's been seeing a lot of play since the changes to Ebony Blade, where it can't be destroyed or have its power reduced. I've seen it in the finals of the past two tournaments that I've covered, so I wanted to take a look at Black Knight myself, and this is the deck list that I came up with. I'll make it a little bit bigger here. I call it Big Zabu. It's Black Knight, it's Zabu. It's a trio of really big cards. And then one thing that I haven't been seeing a lot of people play in their Black Knight lists is kind of like a classic throwback. Dracula and Jubilee, two great ways to cheat out a bunch of power when you're playing these big expensive cards for Black Knight already. And notably, all four of our cards that get a bunch of power onto the board, Dracula, Jubilee, Ghost Rider, and the Ebony Blade from Black Knight, they all cost 4. So you can reduce the cost of all of those by Zabu, which means you can delay your power and delay having priority until the final turn of the game, which means that tech cards like Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Shadow King, all of those can do a lot of work. Now, I do want to say that Shang-Chi and Enchantress in this list are definitely flexible slots. You can replace those out with whatever you see fit. In the videos that we're going to take a look at throughout the rest of this video and the games we're going to take a look at, I am going to be playing Shang-Chi plus Shadow King in those, but the meta has changed a little bit since I've recorded that gameplay, and now I'd probably recommend Enchantress. And once you are doing that, I have seen some people cut Giganto for Red Skull, so that could be something else that you could do where you just say, okay, sorry, did not have this one queued up here, but you could get out Giganto and put in Red Skull, which just gives you a little bit more flexibility in your curve. And then of course the plan is like Red Skull can transfer priority to your opponent as well, and then you can Enchantress, especially if you throw Red Skull in that center lane, turn off your opponent's Mrs. Marvels and Iron Mans and things. There's a lot of ongoing abilities going on right now, so I do think that Enchantress is pretty good. Rogue could also be pretty good though too. A lot of different options, and change those slots around in the deck as you see fit. But like I said, for this video, we're going to take a look at gameplay featuring Shadow King and Shang-Chi. And for this first game, we're going to take a look at a mirror match of sorts. We're going to be playing up against another Black Knight player with a slightly different build of the deck. So we'll see which build is better and if this one does indeed wind up on top. So this turn, I can Blade to discard Infinaut. Probably worth doing even though I haven't found the Black Knight yet, so I will just Blade into Nidavellir. We already have Ghost Rider, so we already have one of our two payoffs, but my opponent has the other one. They've got Black Knight. They are going to discard, I believe that was a Giganto, and they'll grab a 14 power Ebony Blade from that move. This is also going to be a limbo game, so that will further complicate some stuff. On turn 3, just going to drop Zabu. I'll hang on to Lady Sif in case I potentially draw Black Knight down the line. Now that it's a limbo game, there's a little bit more opportunity to potentially find Black Knight and still make use of the Ebony Blade here. So we'll see how that goes. We can see my opponent playing a Lockjaw, which is another kind of like throwback card, I think. So Comas was playing some of these cards in their list when they got second place in a tournament a few weeks ago, and it's basically just like throwback Marvel Snap. It's pool 2 stuff with Jubilee and Dracula. Some of these cards are pool 3, and then obviously Black Knight, that's like pool 5, but most of the deck is like, oh, and then Zabu as well, right? But most of the deck is like pretty attainable, which is part of the reason that I think that Black Knight is worthy of a spotlight key or two. I actually don't really love Selene, but I think that opening up for Iron Lad and Black Knight this week, if you don't have those two cards, is pretty good. on turn 5 there, or turn 4 rather, I go for Ghost Rider and then set up the Black Knight. And now turn 5, I can play Lady Sif, discard Giganto. That's going to give myself an Ebony Blade as well. My opponent will also Lady Sif, discarding Magneto. And awkwardly, they are the Hela version of the deck. I don't actually know this yet, but the Lockjaw is a little bit more common in the Hela version of the deck. But I have a great play here, so I'm going to snap back and see what we can get up to. Magneto to fill the Monster Metropolis and then also lock in a win in Monster Metropolis is really good, but it's even better when you get to move a Lockjaw with Magneto. That's why I was snapping. Moving a Lockjaw just messes with your opponent's plays so much. Like, they could have gotten rid of that Jubilee as well, which probably would have been pretty terrible for me, though I actually gave them the room to Jubilee into Ghost Rider into Magneto, and they Magneto move me over into Limbo, which just means they're not going to be able to stop this Shang-Chi, and I'm definitely going to be able to win. We have priority too. This is a weird scenario where Shang-Chi with priority, actually it's not slightly better, as we'll see in a second, because my opponent actually winds up playing Hela on turn 7, and then they are able to now reanimate a card into Limbo, but it's not going to be enough to beat our Shang-Chi plus the Ebony Blade in that location. So we take my opponent for 8 cubes. My opponent actually stays in it though, and does not just retreat, and they pull off a pretty sweet combo in this game. We've got a great final turn. Shang-Chi plus Ghost Rider seems like basically unbeatable, plus my opponent has priority, but that works out well for them here. Hela into Magneto drags my Lady Sif into Avengers Compound, which means that now my Shang-Chi does not win in Oscorp Tower. It only ties, and it stops my Ghost Rider from allowing me to win in Avengers Compound, and my opponent takes me for 2 cubes, but we will finish them off here in this final game. Let me just jump ahead a little bit. Yeah, this is going to be another like pretty similar game. I thought this, I'm playing these clips actually a little bit out of order, just because I thought this was the best like introductory sort of clips to the deck. But we'll see in this one. We've got Superflow, so that's allowing a little bit more freedom in addition to the Zabu, making my cards a little bit cheaper. My opponent is going to wind up filling up in Sacred Timeline. Ghost Rider gets canceled out, but Hela does get to activate, which gives them a Death and an Infinaut. So they're doing pretty good, but they have lost Sacred Timeline. And then I have Shang-Chi as well. So this basically puts them in like an unwinnable situation here. I just get to play Lady Sif, discard my Infinaut, and then on the final turn of the game, I'll get to play Shang-Chi plus the Ebony Blade. So there's really not much that my opponent can do from here. Could have potentially played Blade this turn. I think that that would have been fine, because Lady Sif's going to discard the Infinaut, and then Blade can discard Shadow King. Ultimately, I don't think it is a huge deal. And I'm also going to have 7 energy next turn, right? So I'll be able to Blade next turn if I decide that I really want to. Then I actually draw Ghost Rider as well. So I really just have like a bunch of options, but I'm just going to stick with Shang-Chi plus Ebony Blade. I feel like that is really tough to beat. And then I'll just play Blade into Sacred Timeline, and that'll... yeah, this seems great. So don't want to play into Magneto or any other silly stuff like that. My opponent just has another Death, though, there, and we will Shang-Chi them and play Ebony Blade. It's effectively playing like 46 power on the final turn of the game, so can't complain. This game is pretty interesting. I run out a turn 3 Jubilee with my Zabu, and I do that into Hala, and then I hit Black Knight off of that, and this now puts me in a really awkward position where I have to battle for Hala on turn 4, or I'm going to lose my Black Knight, and I haven't drawn any of my discard cards yet, So it's going to be tough to get that Black Knight value. Like if I just had a discard card here for Giganto or the Infinaut, then it wouldn't be as big of a deal. But now I'm just about to lose my Black Knight without getting any value of it because I've got Ghost Rider and Shang-Chi kind of drawing these cards in the wrong order. So I battle for Hala and I lose it in spectacular fashion. My opponent beats me with Gladiator, they destroy my Magneto with Yondu, and they take out my Shang-Chi with Spider-Ham. So this game is not looking good at all, but I do still, the deck is still strong. I think that this is a really cool game just because it showcases like how strong the deck can be even when all of these things go wrong, even when you don't get to use the Black Knight and all of those synergies. And yeah, it still gets to get used to pretty nice effect here. Turn 5, I'm just going to play Giganto, and then I'll Blade to discard my Infinaut, set up for a big Ghost Rider for the final turn. Seems good enough to me. However, my opponent has some key disruption, and this is disruption that you do have to be aware of when you are playing a Black Knight list, and that is Maximus. Making you draw more cards can mess with Blade. Now I'm going to discard Dracula from Blade, which actually isn't a huge deal because Ghost Rider will reanimate Dracula, which will then discard the Infinaut, but it's still definitely worth keeping in mind. So a little bit silly. And if my opponent is now going to stay in it on the final turn of the game, I think they really only have one option, and that's probably going to include Shang-Chiing my Giganto. So if they Shang-Chi my Giganto, they will have 7 power in New York, and I can actually beat that if I just move everything into New York. If I move in the Zabu and the Blade, and then play the pig there. Then I can Ghost Rider into the Dracula, into the Infinaut in Elysium. That should be enough 23 power to win that location as well. So I'm still in a pretty good spot here, despite how many things went wrong this game. All of my cards destroyed in Hala, my Shang-Chi turned into a pig, and then my Giganto got Shang-Chi'd. But I'm still able to pull it out just because of how much power this deck can put out on the board, and I think this is one of the best possible single game showcases for this deck, just because of how much didn't work, but how much work the deck was still able to do. So that is a really sweet one. I think that's it for that clip. Yeah, let's jump ahead to one more clip. So this was actually the start of the Gold Conquest. These games are like a little bit sillier, so I didn't want to lead off with this to start off the video. But I started a Gold Conquest. I lost an 8-cuber. Should have retreated. Didn't. It was the first game of the Gold Conquest, so I was feeling a little spicy. Instead, I found myself down a bunch of cubes here. So now we are mounting a comeback. Ghost Rider into Infinaut plus Ebony Blade on turn 6 for 43 power on the final turn. That's a lot of power. Plus I had other power from other things. This deck has a lot of power. It's very powerful. And that's what we're going to see in this one too. This is, you know what, I actually don't remember this game. I don't think, oh, you know what happens in this one? I get Magneto off Sakaar, I snap and my opponent retreats. That's what happens. That's why I don't remember it. Fine enough there. And then Nor Dimension was turned off, but we only take my opponent for 1 cube, which means I'm going to have to win another game on top of everything else. Potentially should have just snapped before Sakaar even came down just to lock my opponent in it for 2 cubes. Because now I got to win a whole nother game on top of everything else. So a little bit awkward. This is a pretty good hand. Black Knight, Blade, Infinaut, or at least it's some of the pieces that we need. Blade can get very tricky in terms of like caring about the order in which you have to draw your cards. I'm just going to run out Black Knight to start this one off, and then this game gets very interesting because our second location is Time Theater. So I get an additional copy of Dracula, which, well, you know what, let's just jump ahead, because I don't remember what happens in the middle of this game, but what happens in the end is awesome. So I Shadow King, that reduces my opponent's power, and then on the final turn of the game, because of Zabu, I'm able to play 2 Draculas on that final turn, and the rest of my hand is stacked. It's Giganto, Infinaut, and Blade, and I'm just going to play for both of the locations that I'm currently losing. My opponent uses Brood to totally swing the location that I was winning, so that's fine, that location's lost. But my hand's actually a lot more powerful than it might seem, because once I discard this first Infinaut to my first Dracula, I create the Ebony Blade, and then I discard the Ebony Blade to the second Dracula. I just thought that one was so fun, and such a silly clip there. There's one more silly clip to round out the one. Don't remember what happens in this game. I just beat my opponent by putting a bunch of power on the board. Boring. But then on the final game of this conquest, to start off my gold conquest run here, I get Tinker's Workshop into Gamma Lab, and playing Jubilee on turn 3 isn't unheard of with this deck. We already saw a game where I did it earlier on in this video, but being able to do it for this game was just so powerful, grabs me a huge Hulk advantage. Also, my opponent should have moved over Jeff, probably. I mean, I play Shang-Chi, they don't, so that kind of makes things a little bit awkward for them in terms of just battling for Gamma Lab at all. But because of that, my opponent is, I guess, just like a little bit frustrated that I was able to mount a comeback here, and I do play out a little bit more, and then my opponent retreats. They concede because we just have so many Hulks. So wasn't really expecting that to go right down to the wire there, only for my opponent to concede, but we would have been able to make a bunch of big Ebony Blades with cloning vats, and I think this one would have been pretty tough for my opponent. We're going to take a look at one final game here to wrap out the video. This is also kind of a silly one, but potentially worth knowing about this interaction if you come across a Kamar Taj game yourself. On turn 4, I play Shadow King without priority into Kiln, thinking if my opponent destroys some stuff this turn, we can Shadow King it and bring it back down. Now my opponent can still easily win in Kiln because either X-23 or Wolverine can still pop over into that location, but we do still have the ability to add some additional power there with Dracula. I am, though, this turn going to discard everything in my hand. I'm going to play Lady Sif and Ghost Rider both into Kamar Taj because I don't know what power potential my opponent could still have with Carnage and all of these Carnage plays into a potential Null. That's the card I was looking for. So I still want to be like careful that I am respectful that my opponent could put out a bunch of power on the final turn here. Wolverine lands back in Stark Tower, so don't have to worry about that though. And initially I play Blade, and then I realize, wait, no, I need to hang on to Blade and Giganto, and then I'll 50-50 discard one to Dracula. Either one will win me the Kiln. If they are not able to destroy X-23 or Wolverine, all they do is play a big Null, which is good, but it's not bigger than a 35 power Ghost Rider on the final turn of the game. So there you go, plus Dracula takes the Giganto, because why not? I'm NoLucksGiven. That's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.